Okay, so last week, I swear, it took me longer to order a pizza online than it did to actually eat it. Like, seriously, that app's design, it's like they don't want you to order pizza. Like, people like that. Like, some websites and apps, they're just painful to use. Well, get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into the world of UX design. And trust me, even if you've never designed a thing in your life, understanding UX is like a superpower for navigating our increasingly digital world. We've got a stack of research and real-world examples to unpack. So buckle up, because we're about to find out why some digital experiences are smooth as silk, while others feel like, well, navigating that pizza ordering app from my nightmares.
I'm ready to dig in.
Great. So one of the articles we came across uses this really clever analogy to explain UX design. Hey, imagine a toy store. You know, the kind where kids drag their parents in, begging for the latest and greatest gadgets. Well, good UX design is like making sure that toy store is a delight to shop in, not a nightmare. Doors open smoothly, the aisles are easy to navigate, the toys are arranged in a way that makes sense, and the checkout process, a total breeze.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that analogy is how it connects to customer satisfaction because, I mean, let's be real. If that toy store is a pain to navigate, those parents are walking out, empty hands, frustrated kid, and probably not coming back anytime soon.
Okay, so bad UX equals lost customers. Makes sense.
Exactly. And in the business world, that translates to lost revenue, negative word of mouth, all the things you don't want.
So it's not just about making things look pretty. There's a real bottom line impact here.
100%. We actually found a case study about a company that sells software online. They realized that by improving their UX, specifically by making their checkout process simpler, they could potentially increase their sales by 20%.
Whoa, 20%. Okay, now you're speaking my language. So we've established that UX is about the big picture, the entire experience. But how do we actually measure its success? Is it just happy customers, or are there more concrete metrics we can look at?
That's a great question. It's not just about subjective feelings, although those are important. We're talking about hard data. Things like conversion rates. How many people are actually following through with that desired action? Like, are they making a purchase, signing up for a newsletter? And we also look at customer retention rates. Are people coming back for more, or are they jumping ship to a competitor? Even something as simple as fewer customer support inquiries can indicate good UX.
So it's about analyzing that whole user journey, figuring out where those friction points are, those moments of frustration.
Exactly. And this is where the difference between UX and UI comes in.
Oh yeah, UI. That's another one of those design terms I hear thrown around a lot, but I'll admit I don't always grasp the distinction.
I get it. UI stands for user interface, and it's definitely related to UX, but they're not interchangeable.
Okay, so enlighten me.
Think of it this way. UI is like the clothes, the visual styling, the look and feel of a website or app. It's all about aesthetics, the presentation. UX, on the other hand, is about the experience itself. How easy is it to navigate? How intuitive does it feel? Does it help users accomplish their goals?
So they work together, but UI is just one piece of the bigger UX puzzle.
You got it.
Okay, that clarifies things. UI is UX is how it all comes together to create that seamless, enjoyable experience.
Exactly. And one of the best examples of this is Amazon's one-click buying.
Oh, you mean that glorious feature where you can buy something with like a single click?
That's the one. It might seem like a small detail, but the impact has been huge for Amazon.
Well, it's also been huge for my wallet.
It really comes down to psychology. Before one-click buying, online checkout was this whole thing, right? Multiple pages, entering payment info, shipping info. Each step was a chance for someone to reconsider their purchase or get distracted.
Oh, totally. I can't tell you how many times I've abandoned an online shopping cart because the checkout process was just too much.
Exactly. But by removing that friction, by tapping into our desire for instant gratification, Amazon created a seamless experience that's translated to billions of dollars in sales.
Wow, talk about the power of a single click. It really drives home the point that even small UX changes can have a huge impact.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of really understanding user behavior, user psychology, which actually leads us to another interesting aspect of UX design.
Okay, I'm listening.
Because believe it or not, there's a lot of debate, even controversy within the UX community about the best way to do things.
Really? I mean, I know designers can be a passionate bunch, but I figured there'd be some general agreement on what works best, right?
I think so, wouldn't you? But even in a field that's all about creating seamless experiences, there are some pretty passionate debates about how to get there.
Okay, well now I need to know more. What kind of things are UX designers arguing about?
One of the biggest and oldest debates in the UX world is aesthetics versus functionality.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like the age-old style versus substance debate, but for the digital world.
Exactly. You've got some designers who are all about stunning visuals, eye-catching graphics. They'll say that a visually appealing layout is crucial to grabbing a user's attention. And, in a crowded digital world, you got to stand out somehow, right?
Right. And let's be real, a beautifully designed website is just more enjoyable to look at than one that looks like it was designed in the 90s.
Totally. But then you have a whole other group of UX designers who argue that if the website is difficult to use, if the navigation's clunky, if users can't figure out how to do what they came there to do, none of those fancy visuals matter.
It's like having a beautifully designed car with a terrible engine. It might look great, but it's not going to get you very far.
That is a perfect analogy, and that's the struggle, finding that sweet spot. You want it to be visually appealing, but it also has to be functional and user-friendly.
So are there any right or wrong answers here? Is one side right and the other wrong?
That's the thing about UX design. There are rarely easy answers. It often comes down to the specific project, the target audience, the goals.
So what are some of the other big UX debates that keep designers up at night?
Well, another one that's been getting a lot of attention lately is the ethics of dark patterns.
Dark patterns.
Okay.
Okay, that sounds kind of ominous. What exactly are we talking about here?
Essentially, dark patterns are design elements that are intentionally crafted to manipulate users into taking certain actions they probably wouldn't choose if they were fully informed.
Oh, okay. That does sound a little shady. Can you give me some examples? I'm having trouble picturing what that looks like in action.
Sure. Ever get stuck with those annoying pop-ups that make it practically impossible to decline cookies?
Oh, yeah, those things drive me crazy.
You're just trying to read an article, and this massive pop-up appears, bombarding you with all this jargon about data collection, and you just want to make it go away, so you just click the big green accept all button, even though you have no idea what you're agreeing to.
I've totally fallen for that.
Right. It's like they're making it confusing on purpose, so you'll just give in and click what they want you to click.
Exactly.
Or how about those subscription models that make it super easy to sign up, but then you can't figure out how to cancel?
Oh, or those online forms that automatically pre-select options that benefit the company, like adding extra insurance to your purchase, even though you probably wouldn't choose that option if they didn't pre-select it for you.
Exactly. They're everywhere, these sneaky little design tactics.
Okay, so where do UX designers stand on this?
Yeah.
Is it all fair game in the name of boosting those conversions and meeting business goals?
That's the million-dollar question. Some designers see these dark patterns as just another tool in their toolkit, a way to, as you said, nudge users in the right direction.
Because at the end of the day, every business wants people to click that buy now button.
Right. But there's a growing number of UX designers who see these tactics as straight up deceptive, unethical. They'll tell you it erodes trust in brands.
And I imagine once a user feels tricked, they're not going to want to do business with that company again.
Exactly. So even if those dark patterns work in the short term, they can do real damage to a company's reputation.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope for sure. It's making me rethink some of my own online habits.
It's definitely something to be aware of. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about another challenge that comes up a lot in UX design: balancing business goals with, actual user needs.
Oh, that sounds like a recipe for conflict. I mean, businesses are ultimately out to make money. So how do you balance that with creating an experience that's truly user-centered?
It's a constant balancing act, and honestly, it's one of the most important skills a UX designer can develop. Let's say a company wants to get more users to sign up for their premium service, right? Pretty common business goal.
Right.
So a UX designer might be tasked with, subtly nudging users towards that premium option. Maybe they highlight the benefits of going premium, or they make the free version a little less appealing. But here's the thing. If those nudges are too aggressive, too in your face, it can backfire.
Right, because nobody likes to feel pressured into spending more money.
Exactly. The UX designer has to walk this fine line between meeting those business objectives while still ensuring a positive experience for the user.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where the needs of the business and the needs of the user, they kind of meet in the middle.
Precisely. And that's not always easy. And another tricky thing about this balancing act is figuring out how to add new features while still keeping things user-friendly.
Oh, I can definitely see how that could be a struggle. On the one hand, you want the product to feel cutting edge, but on the other hand, if it's too complicated, people are going to give up.
Exactly. Let's say you're designing a music streaming app. It's tempting to cram in all the bells and whistles curated playlists, social sharing, podcasts, But if those extra features make it hard to actually listen to music, which is kind of the whole point, right? Users are just going to switch to a simpler app.
So how do you decide which features are essential and which ones you should leave on the cutting room floor, so to speak?
It's a constant process of testing, gathering feedback, refining.
Yeah.
And it often means having some tough conversations with stakeholders who might be attached to certain features, even if they're not serving the user.
It sounds like being a good UX designer requires you to be a good communicator and collaborator, not just someone who's good with design software.
Absolutely. And speaking of collaboration, one of the most important aspects of UX happens behind the scenes, within the design team itself.
Okay, so let's pull back the curtain and see what's really going on in those design team meetings. What kind of conversations are they having?
Well, one conversation that comes up all the time is deadlines. In the tech world, things move fast. And sometimes that means UX design gets treated as a nice-to-have rather than a must-have.
I can only imagine. It's like trying to bake a cake in 5 minutes. Sure, you can do it, but it's probably not going to be your best work.
Perfect analogy. When you've got a tight deadline, there's always the risk that you'll compromise the quality of the UX.
So how do you decide when to stand your ground on those design principles and when to make compromises to get the product out the door?
Honestly, that's where good communication is key. You have to have really open and honest discussions from the very beginning about what's non-negotiable in terms of UX.
So it's all about setting realistic expectations right from the start.
Exactly. And another big thing that comes up in design teams is feedback. Specifically, how important it is to get feedback and actually incorporate it throughout the entire process.
That makes sense. Because what's the point of designing something beautiful if the people who are actually using it hate it?
Exactly. And that feedback can come from all over: internal stakeholders, user testing, even customer service interactions.
So it's about creating a culture where feedback is welcomed, valued.
Precisely. And the best UX designers I know, they're the ones who are constantly trying to understand the people they're designing for. They're always looking for ways to make things better.
It's less about striving for perfection on the first try and more about constantly learning and improving.
You got it.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of feedback, but what about actually gathering information about user behavior and preferences? What are some of the tools and techniques that UX designers use?
That's a great question. And it leads us to the fascinating world of UX research, because before you can even start designing, you need to understand the people you're designing for, their needs, their behaviors, their pain points.
So it's like you're conducting an investigation. But instead of solving crimes, you're solving design problems.
Love that analogy. And just like detectives, UX researchers have a whole bunch of tools and techniques that they use. One of the most common ones is usability testing.
Usability testing. Okay, tell me more. I'm intrigued.
Basically, it involves observing real users as they interact with a product, or even just a prototype. The designers will give participants specific tasks like find this product on our e-commerce website or book a flight using this app. And then they observe how the user behaves.
So you're watching to see if they get stuck, if they misunderstand any instructions, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Are they able to complete the task? And if so, are they enjoying the process?
That's so interesting. It reminds me of those shows where they have hidden cameras in stores to see how people shop. Except here, the focus is on making the experience better for the user.
Precisely. It's about understanding how the user thinks, what they expect, where they might get tripped up.
That's fascinating. Okay, so how do you even find people to participate in these usability tests?
Another great question. It depends. Sometimes companies will use their own customers, invite them to participate. Other times they'll work with market research firms that specialize in recruiting people who fit certain demographics.
So it's all about finding people who are representative of the target audience.
Exactly. And the great thing about usability testing is that you can do it at any stage in the design process. In fact, the earlier you start, the better. It's much easier to make changes early on than it is to go back and fix things later.
So it's all about catching those usability issues before they become major headaches.
Exactly. And usability testing is just one tool in the UX researcher's toolkit. There are a bunch of other methods they use to gather data about the user experience, both qualitative and quantitative.
Okay, I'm all ears. What other UX research methods should we know about?
Well, another common one is user interviews.
User interviews. So this is where you sit down with a user and just pick their brain, right?
Exactly. You're having one-on-one conversations to get their feedback on their experiences, what they need, what their pain points are.
So it's a chance to really dig deep and get some valuable insights.
Absolutely. User interviews are great for uncovering things that you might not discover through other research methods.
It's like being a journalist, but instead of a news story, you're uncovering the story of the user's experience.
I like that. And just like journalists, good UX researchers are skilled at asking the right questions, listening actively,
Oh.
and reading between the lines to find those deeper insights.
Okay, so we've got usability testing and user interviews. What else?
Well, surveys are another popular method for gathering user feedback. Surveys let you reach a much larger audience and gather quantitative data on user preferences.
So if you need to get data from a lot of people quickly, surveys are the way to go.
Exactly. And with all the online survey platforms out there these days, it's super easy to create and send out surveys.
That's good to know. I'm already starting to think about how I can use some of these UX research techniques in my own work.
That's great. And honestly, you don't have to be a UX professional to benefit from thinking like a UX researcher.
So what you're saying is anyone can benefit from being more observant of the world around them
100%.
and from being more intentional about creating experiences that are both functional and enjoyable.
Exactly. And as we continue exploring the world of UX design, we're going to delve even deeper into these research methods, talk about their pros and cons, and we'll even share some examples of how they're used in the real world to create amazing user experiences.
Okay, so we've talked about usability testing, user interviews, and surveys. But those aren't the only tools in a UX researcher's toolkit, right?
Right. There's another method that's really fascinating, though it's used less often, eye tracking.
Eye tracking. Okay, that sounds intense. Are we talking about some kind of high-tech gadget that tracks where people are looking on a screen?
Exactly. It might sound like something out of science fiction, but it's actually a really valuable tool for UX researchers. Basically, eye tracking technology allows us to see websites and apps through the user's eyes, literally.
So you can see what elements are grabbing their attention, what they're missing, and how their gaze flows across the screen.
Precisely. It's a goldmine of information about how people actually visually process information on a screen. For example, eye tracking studies have shown that people tend to scan content in an F-shaped pattern, at least when they're first landing on a website.
An F-shaped pattern. You mean like they're scanning across the top of the page, then down the left side, kind of like they're skimming a newspaper article.
Exactly. And this kind of insight is invaluable for UX designers. It tells them where to place the most important information like headlines, key takeaways, and calls to action to make sure it gets noticed.
That makes a lot of sense. So if you want to grab someone's attention quickly, you don't bury the lead, you put it right there at the top of the page where their eyes are naturally drawn.
Exactly. And eye tracking can also reveal usability issues that might not be obvious through other research methods. For example, if users are consistently struggling to find a particular button or menu item, the eye tracking data might show that the element is either too small, too inconspicuously placed, or visually blending in with its surroundings.
It's like having X-ray vision into the user's experience. You can actually see what's tripping them up. So with all these different research methods at their disposal, how does a UX researcher decide which approach is best for a particular project?
That's a great question. The choice of research method often depends on a number of factors: the research goals, the timeline, the budget, and the type of data you're hoping to collect.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Each project requires a tailored approach.
Exactly. Sometimes a combination of methods might be the most effective approach, allowing you to gather both qualitative and quantitative data to get a more holistic understanding of the user's experience.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of UX research, the different methods UX researchers use, and the insights they can glean from these methods. But let's bring it back to the bigger picture for a moment. We've been throwing around the term UX design a lot today. But for someone who's completely new to this world, how would you define it? What does it actually mean to design an experience?
That's a great question, and it's one that's often debated within the UX community itself. But at its core, UX design is about applying the principles of design thinking to create products, services, and systems that are useful, usable, and enjoyable to interact with.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly are the principles of design thinking?
Design thinking is a human-centered approach to problem solving. It starts with empathy, with truly understanding the needs, desires, and motivations of the people you're designing for.
So it's about putting yourself in the user's shoes and seeing the world from their perspective.
Exactly. And this empathy is then used to inform the entire design process, from ideation to prototyping to testing and iterating.
So it's not just about aesthetics. It's about solving real problems for real people.
Absolutely. And one of the key tenets of design thinking is the idea of iteration. Design thinkers embrace the idea that you're rarely going to get it right on the first try.
So it's less about striving for perfection and more about embracing the journey of continuous improvement.
Exactly. Design thinking is all about testing, learning, and refining your ideas until you arrive at a solution that truly meets the needs of the user.
Okay, so design thinking is the foundation of UX design. But what are some of the specific skills and qualities that make a great UX designer?
Well, first and foremost, a great UX designer is a keen observer of human behavior. They're constantly paying attention to how people interact with the world around them, both online and offline.
So they're like those people who are always noticing the details that everyone else misses.
Exactly. They're the ones who notice that the door handle is awkward to grip, or that the signage in the grocery store is confusing, or that the online checkout process is frustratingly complex.
And instead of just complaining about it, they're thinking, how can I make this better?
Precisely. They're natural problem solvers who are driven by a desire to make the world a more user-friendly place.
Okay, so observation is key. What other skills are important for aspiring UX designers to develop?
Well, communication is crucial. UX designers don't work in a vacuum. They're constantly collaborating with other designers, developers, product managers, and stakeholders. So they need to be able to clearly articulate their ideas, both verbally and in writing.
And they need to be good listeners too, right? I mean, if they're constantly gathering feedback from users and stakeholders, they need to be able to really hear what people are saying and understand their perspectives.
Absolutely. Active listening is an essential skill for any UX designer. And it's not just about hearing the words people are saying. It's about paying attention to their tone of voice, their body language, and the emotions behind their words.
So it's about more than just gathering information. It's about building relationships and creating a sense of trust.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important quality of great UX designers: empathy.
We talked about empathy earlier in the context of design thinking. How does it play out in the day-to-day work of a UX designer?
Well, empathy allows UX designers to truly understand the needs and motivations of their users. It allows them to step outside of their own assumptions and biases and see the world through the eyes of someone who might have very different experiences and perspectives.
So it's about designing with compassion and understanding, not just for the sake of ticking boxes on a checklist.
Exactly. And this empathy is essential for creating products and services that are truly user-centered.
Okay, so we've got observation, communication, empathy. Are there any other skills or qualities that are essential for success in the world of UX design?
Well, in today's digital landscape, having a strong understanding of technology is becoming increasingly important. UX designers don't need to be coding whizzes, but they do need to have a basic understanding of how websites, apps, and software are built.
So they need to be able to speak the language of developers and engineers.
Exactly. They need to be able to communicate their design ideas in a way that makes sense to the people who are actually building the product or service.
Okay, that makes sense. So if someone is listening to this and thinking, this sounds like the perfect career for me, what advice would you give them? Where do they even begin?
Well, the good news is that there are tons of resources available for aspiring UX designers. There are online courses, boot camps, workshops, you name it. And many of these programs are designed for people with little to no prior design experience.
So it's never too late to make a career switch.
Absolutely not. In fact, many UX designers come from diverse backgrounds: psychology, marketing, journalism, you name it.
So it's more about having a passion for creating user-centered experiences than it is about having a specific degree or background.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to break into the field of UX design is to start building a portfolio of work.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you build a portfolio if you're just starting out and don't have any real-world client projects under your belt?
That's where personal projects and volunteer work come in. One great way to gain experience and build your portfolio is to redesign an existing website or app that you think could use some improvement.
So you could take a website that's driving you crazy with its clunky design and give it a user-friendly makeover.
Exactly. Or you could volunteer your UX skills to a nonprofit organization that could benefit from a website redesign or a more user-friendly app.
That's a great idea. It's a win-win. You get to gain valuable experience, and the nonprofit gets a much-needed design upgrade.
Exactly. And once you have a few projects under your belt, you can start reaching out to UX design agencies or applying for in-house UX design positions at larger companies.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from the fundamental principles of UX design to the specific skills and qualities that make a great UX designer. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious about something. You've been immersed in this world for a while now. What's one thing you wish more people understood about UX design?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about UX design is that it's all about making things look pretty.
Right. We've talked about that. It's about
Mhm.
much more than just aesthetics.
Exactly. UX design is about solving problems, creating intuitive and enjoyable experiences, and ultimately making people's lives easier and more fulfilling. It's about understanding human behavior, anticipating needs, and crafting solutions that are both functional and delightful.
Well said. And in a world that's increasingly dominated by technology, I think the role of the UX designer is only going to become more important.
I completely agree. UX design has the power to shape not only our digital experiences, but also our physical spaces, our interactions with each other, and ultimately our overall quality of life.
That's an inspiring thought. So as we navigate this increasingly digital world, let's all try to be a little more mindful of the experiences we're creating, both for ourselves and for others.
Absolutely. And let's not be afraid to embrace the principles of UX design in all aspects of our lives, from the way we organize our homes to the way we communicate with our loved ones.
Because at the end of the day, who wouldn't want to create a more user-friendly and enjoyable experience for themselves and everyone around them?
I couldn't agree more.
It's amazing how much thought and intention goes into designing experiences that seem effortless. It reminds me of that quote about the swan gracefully gliding on the surface while paddling furiously underneath.
Absolutely. That's a great analogy for what UX designers do. They're working behind the scenes, anticipating potential pain points, and smoothing out the rough edges so the user can have a seamless and enjoyable experience.
Well, as much as I'd love to keep geeking out about UX design all day, we're nearing the end of our deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder.
Okay.
So imagine you're tasked with designing the ultimate user experience for something we do every day, something as seemingly mundane as, say, making a cup of coffee.
Interesting.
Yeah. How would you approach that challenge?
Hmm.
What features would you prioritize? What pain points would you try to eliminate?
Well, I think the first thing you'd want to consider is what kind of coffee drinker you're designing for.
Okay, yeah. Because we're not all created equal when it comes to our caffeine needs.
Exactly. Are you designing for the caffeine fiend who needs their espresso shot ASAP? Or are you designing for the coffee connoisseur who enjoys a more, shall we say, ritualistic experience?
Right. Like, do you want a super efficient, streamlined process, or are you going for a more immersive sensory experience?
Exactly. And then there are all those little details to think about.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, how does the user interact with the coffee maker?
Right. Buttons, touch screen, voice control.
Exactly. And what about the mug?
Oh. What about a smart mug that keeps your coffee at the perfect temperature?
I love it.
Or maybe even an app that tracks your coffee consumption and makes personalized recommendations based on your preferences.
Now you're really thinking like a UX designer.
This is fun.
It is, isn't it?
And it just goes to show you, UX design can be applied to anything.
100%.
Yeah.
And the more we understand about UX, the more we realize that it's not just about digital products and services. It's about creating experiences that are enjoyable, efficient, and ultimately human-centered.
Well said. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But for our listeners, I encourage you, the next time you're using an app or browsing a website, take a moment to really pay attention to the experience. Ask yourself, what's working, what's not, what could be better, and who knows, maybe you'll discover a hidden talent for UX design. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us.